Most people who take a calcium supplement every morning believe they are doing the single most important thing for their bones, and in some ways they are right, but there is a piece of the puzzle that almost never gets mentioned on the label, and once you understand it, the whole idea of bone health starts to look different. Calcium is not the only mineral your bones depend on. There is a vitamin working quietly in the background that decides where that calcium actually goes, and if this vitamin is missing, calcium does not always end up where you want it. That vitamin is vitamin K, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly which foods provide it, how it works alongside calcium and vitamin D, and why simply eating healthy is not always the same as eating in a way that protects your skeleton as you get older. Here is the question we are really answering today. If your bones are constantly being broken down and rebuilt throughout your life, what tells your body to place that new bone mineral in the right place and keep it out of the wrong places? The answer involves a group of proteins that only work correctly when vitamin K is present, and once you see how that process works, 7 ordinary foods on your grocery list will start to look a lot more important. Let's start with what is actually happening inside your bones. Your skeleton is not a fixed structure like a steel beam. It is living tissue, constantly being broken down in small amounts and rebuilt again, a process that continues for your entire life. Specialized cells break down old or damaged bone, while other cells build new bone in its place. For that new bone to be strong, it needs to be mineralized correctly, meaning calcium and phosphate need to be locked into the right structural pattern. This is where a protein called osteocalcin comes in. Osteocalcin is produced by your bone-building cells, but in its raw form, it cannot properly bind calcium into the bone matrix. It needs to be activated first, and that activation step depends on vitamin K. Without enough vitamin K, a portion of your osteocalcin stays in an inactive form, less able to do its job of helping calcium settle correctly into bone. There is a second protein worth understanding, called matrix GLA protein, and this one works almost like a gatekeeper for your blood vessel. Its job is to help prevent calcium from being deposited in soft tissue, including the walls of your arteries, where you do not want mineral buildup. Like osteocalcin, matrix GLA protein also depends on vitamin K to become active. So here is the bigger picture forming already. Calcium is the raw material. Vitamin D helps your body absorb that calcium from your digestive system, but vitamin K activates the specific proteins that direct where the calcium goes, encouraging it toward your bones and away from places like your blood vessel. This is why some researchers describe vitamin D and vitamin K as working as a team rather than independently, even though most people have only ever heard about vitamin D in that partnership. Now, there is an important detail about vitamin K itself that most people never learn. Vitamin K is not one single compound. It exists mainly in 2 related forms. The first is vitamin K1, sometimes called phylloquinone, and this is the form found abundantly in leafy green vegetables. The second is vitamin K2, sometimes called menaquinone, and this form is produced by certain bacteria, which is why it shows up in fermented foods and some animal products, and in small amounts made by bacteria in your own gut. Both forms matter, but they are not identical in how your body uses them. K1 is absorbed efficiently but tends to be used quickly by the liver for its more immediate role in blood clotting. K2 tends to stay active in the bloodstream longer, which is part of why some researchers have paid particular attention to K2 when studying bone and cardiovascular health specifically. This does not mean K1 is unimportant. It means a well-rounded approach to vitamin K includes both plant sources rich in K1 and fermented or animal-based sources that provide K2. With that foundation in place, let's go through 7 foods that give you meaningful amounts of vitamin K, starting with the most familiar and moving toward some that might genuinely surprise you. The first food is kale. If you have spent any time around health content in the last decade, you already know kale has a reputation, but most people assume that reputation is about vitamin C or antioxidant. In reality, one of the most significant things kale offers is an especially high concentration of vitamin K1. Among common leafy greens, kale sits near the very top of the list, along with a small number of other dark leafy vegetables. Here is a situation worth imagining. Picture someone who eats a salad most days, feels good about that habit, and assumes their nutrition is well covered. But if that salad is built mostly around lettuce, particularly the paler, lighter varieties, the vitamin K content may be far lower than they assume, because lighter colored lettuce contains only a fraction of what a dark leafy green like kale provides. The lesson is not that lettuce is bad. The lesson is that not all greens are equal when it comes to this particular nutrient, and color is often a useful clue, since the deep green pigment in vegetables is closely tied to the compounds that also carry vitamin K1. The second food is broccoli. Broccoli belongs to the same family as kale, the cruciferous vegetables, and it carries a meaningful amount of vitamin K1 as well, alongside fiber and other compounds that have been studied for general health support. What makes broccoli worth mentioning separately is that it solves a practical problem. Many older adults find raw leafy greens harder to chew or digest comfortably, especially if dental issues or certain digestive sensitivities are present. Broccoli, especially when lightly steamed, offers a softer texture while still preserving a useful amount amount of its vitamin K content, since vitamin K is relatively stable through gentle cooking, unlike some more heat-sensitive vitamins. This raises a practical question many people have never actually thought about. Does cooking destroy vitamin K? For most vegetables, light cooking methods like steaming or light sautéing preserve the majority of the vitamin K content, and in some cases can even make it easier for your body to absorb, since vitamin K is a fat-soluble vitamin, meaning it is absorbed better when eaten alongside some dietary fat such as olive oil. That detail matters more than it might seem. If you eat a plate of steamed broccoli with nothing else, without any fat present, your body may absorb meaningfully less of the available vitamin K than if that same broccoli were lightly dressed with olive oil or eaten alongside a food that naturally contains some fat. This is one of those small, practical adjustments that costs nothing extra but can genuinely change how much of a nutrient your body actually uses, rather than how much simply passes through. The third food is Brussels sprouts, another member of the cruciferous vegetable family, and one that tends to be underestimated. Per serving, Brussels sprouts provide a substantial amount of vitamin K1, often more than people expect from a vegetable so often reduced to a side dish or a holiday tradition. There is a common mistake worth addressing here. Many people associate Brussels sprouts with a bitter, unpleasant taste, often based on childhood memories of overcooked versions. Roasting Brussels sprouts at a higher temperature, rather than boiling them, tends to bring out a very different flavor, one that is often described as nutty and slightly caramelized rather than bitter, while still preserving their vitamin K content reasonably well. The fourth food is spinach, and this is where an interesting nuance appears. Spinach is often placed in the same conversation as kale, and it does provide a strong amount of vitamin K1. But spinach also contains compounds called oxalate, which can bind to certain minerals, including calcium, and reduce how much of that specific mineral your body absorbs from that particular meal. This does not cancel out spinach's vitamin K contribution, since vitamin K itself is not affected by oxalate in the same way calcium is. But it is a useful example of why food is complicated, and why no single food is automatically the perfect solution on its own. Spinach remains a valuable source of vitamin K, but it works best as part of a varied pattern of eating, rather than as the only leafy green someone relies on every single day. The fifth food moves into fermented territory, and this is where many viewers hear about something for the first time. Natto is a traditional Japanese food made from fermented soybean, and it happens to be one of the richest known dietary sources of vitamin K2 specifically, largely because of the particular bacteria used in its fermentation process. Researchers studying populations with historically lower rates of certain bone-related concerns have looked closely at regions where natto is a regular part of the diet, and vitamin K2 intake is one of the factors that has drawn attention in that context. Now, here is an honest moment worth pausing on. Natto has a distinctive texture and smell that many people outside of Japan find unfamiliar, sometimes described as sticky or pungent, and it will not be for everyone. This is exactly the kind of case where a food can be genuinely valuable nutritionally without being something every viewer will want to add to their weekly routine, and that is completely fine. Understanding that natto exists as one of the most concentrated K2 sources still matters, even for someone who never personally eats it, because it helps explain why some of the other foods on this list, the ones made through fermentation, carry K2 as well. Which leads to the sixth food, and this one might be the most surprising: aged cheese. Certain cheeses, particularly harder, aged varieties, are produced using bacterial fermentation, and that fermentation process generates vitamin K2 as a byproduct, in a similar way to how it forms in natto, though generally in smaller amounts. This means a modest serving of a fermented cheese is not only a source of calcium and protein, but also contributes some vitamin K2 to the same meal, in effect delivering more than one relevant bone-related nutrient at once. Of course, this comes with an important qualification, since cheese also tends to be higher in sodium and saturated fat, and anyone managing blood pressure, cholesterol, or a broader dietary restriction should think of cheese as something enjoyed in a reasonable portion, not as a primary vitamin K strategy on its own. The goal here is not to suggest eating large amounts of cheese for bone health. It is simply to correct a common misconception, the idea that vitamin K only comes from green vegetables, when in reality a completely different category of food, through the process of fermentation, contributes a related but distinct form of the same vitamin. The seventh food brings us somewhere unexpected: prunes, or dried plums. Unlike the previous foods, which mostly get attention for vitamin K1 or K2 directly, prunes have drawn research interest for a slightly different reason. Some studies looking at bone density in older adults have examined dried plums specifically, exploring whether regularly including them in the diet is associated with better bone-related markers over time, alongside providing a modest amount of vitamin K1, along with potassium, boron, and certain plant compounds studied for their possible role in bone metabolism. It is important to be precise here rather than overstating things. This research area is still developing, and the results are best described as an interesting association worth further study, not a guaranteed outcome for any individual who adds prunes to their diet. But it is a genuinely useful example of a food that quietly overlap with bone health in more than one way beyond vitamin K alone, and it also solves a very practical, very common problem for many older adults: digestive regularity, since dried plums are also well known for their effect on digestion thanks to their fiber and sorbitol content. So now we have gone through kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, spinach, natto, aged cheese, and prunes. But there is one detail we still have not addressed directly, and it may be the single most important safety point in this entire video. Vitamin K plays a central role in blood clotting. That is actually its original and most well-established function, discovered long before its connection to bone health was studied. For most people, eating vitamin K-rich food simply supports normal, healthy clotting alongside its role in bone metabolism, and there is no conflict there at all. But there is one group of people for whom this matters in a very specific way: anyone taking a blood-thinning medication that works by interfering with vitamin K, such as warfarin. For these individuals, sudden large changes in vitamin K intake, whether eating unusually large amounts of leafy greens all at once, or suddenly cutting them out entirely, can affect how well that medication is working. This is not a reason to avoid vitamin K-rich foods altogether if you are on this type of medication. It is a reason to keep your intake relatively consistent from week to week, and to talk with your doctor or pharmacist about how your specific medication and diet should work together, since they will be able to give guidance based on your actual lab results and health history, which is something no general video can safely provide. If you are not on this type of blood-thinning medication, this particular caution does not apply to you in the same way, and vitamin K-rich foods can simply be treated as a beneficial part of a varied diet supporting bone health. This brings us to a practical question many viewers are probably already asking: how much of these foods is actually enough? Rather than focusing on an exact number that can feel abstract and hard to apply at the dinner table, it helps to think in terms of pattern rather than precision. Regularly including a serving of a dark leafy green most days, occasionally including a cruciferous vegetable like broccoli or Brussels sprouts, and thinking of fermented sauces like cheese or, for those willing to try it, natto, as occasional contributors, builds a diet naturally rich in both forms of vitamin K over time, without needing to track a single number. It's also worth remembering that vitamin K rarely works alone in the body. It works best as part of a broader pattern that includes adequate calcium, whether from dairy, fortified foods, or certain leafy greens, and adequate vitamin D, whether from sensible sun exposure, fortified foods, or a supplement recommended by a doctor. Thinking of bone health as a single nutrient problem, whether that nutrient is calcium, vitamin D, or vitamin K, misses the way these pieces actually work together as a coordinated system inside your body. There is one more misconception worth clearing up before we finish. Some people hear about vitamin K and assume that if a little is good, more must be better, perhaps reaching for a high-dose supplement instead of food. For most healthy adults not on blood-thinning medication, getting vitamin K primarily through food, rather than concentrated supplements, tends to be the more balanced and better studied approach, and any decision to take a vitamin K supplement specifically should really be discussed with a healthcare provider first, since individual health conditions and medications can change what is appropriate. So let's return to the question we started with. What decides where the calcium in your body actually goes? Towards strengthening your bone, or toward places you would rather it avoid? The answer, as we've seen, is not calcium alone, and it is not vitamin D alone. It is vitamin K, quietly activating the proteins that guide that process, working in the background of a system most people never think about until a bone density concern brings it to their attention. Kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and spinach offer strong amounts of vitamin K1, each with its own texture, flavor, and practical role in a weekly diet. Natto and aged cheese offer vitamin K2 through very different fermentation traditions, one far more unfamiliar to many viewers than the other. And prunes offer a smaller but genuinely interesting contribution tied to a broader pattern of research on bone density in older adults. None of these foods needs to be eaten every single day to matter. What matters more is a consistent pattern over months and years, since bone remodeling itself is a slow, ongoing process, not something that changes overnight. The habits that support it work the same way: steady, unremarkable, repeated choices that add up to something meaningful over time. If you found this explanation useful, consider subscribing, since we focus on making topics like this easier to understand clearly, without exaggeration and without unnecessary complexity, so that the choices you make at the grocery store actually connect to what is happening inside your body.